Jeffrey Frazier. This is Black Wall Street Chronicles, and we back at it again. Today we're doing a special episode where I'm going to talk about reparations for foundational Black Americans. Um, Reparations is a real big issue for the African American community, and it is brung to the forefront. And the reason why it's been front to the forefront because the hashtag ADOS movement has done so. You have Yvette Carnell and Tone Talks and Tariq Nasheed and Professor Black Truth and Jason Black of the Black Authority and all these other prominent African American social media influencers on the internet that's talking about it. Um, like I said in the first episode, my family's from Durham, North Carolina, and Durham, North Carolina is when they built the first black bank and the first all black insurance company. And so this talking point is very special to me. Personally, I've been victim of, I'm not really to speak about my tragedy, but I'm personally a victim of this system. So what we're going to do is I went to wikipedia.com so I can get the exact definition for reparations for slavery to basically make clear what it means. So here it goes. I'm reading it to you guys now. Reparations for slavery is a political justice concept that argues that reparations should be paid to the descendants of Africans trafficked to and enslaved in the Americas as a consequence of the Atlantic slave trade. The most notable demands for reparations have been made in the United Kingdom and the United States. These reparations are speculative, that is, they have never been paid, and they can be contrasted with compensated emancipation, the money that some governments pay some slave owners when slavery was abolished, as compensation for the loss of their property. Slavery ended in the United States in 1865 with the end of the American Civil War and the ratification of the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which declared that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. At that time, an estimated 4 million African Americans were set free. Within the political sphere, only one major bill demanding slavery reparation has been proposed. The Commission to Study Reparation Proposals from the African Americans Act, which former Representative Tron Coyers Jr. proposed unsuccessfully to the United States Congress every year from 1989 until his resignation in 2017. As its name suggests, the bill recommended the creation of a commission to study the impact of slavery on social, political, and economic life of our nation. In 2014, prominent American journalist Ta-Nehisi Coates published an article titled The Case for Reparations, which discussed the continued effects of slavery and Jim Crow laws that have renewed demands for reparations. Coates makes reference to Representative John Coyers Jr. and fomented H.R. 40 bill, pointing out that the Congress failure to pass this bill expressed a lack of willingness to right their past wrongs. In September 2016, the United Nations Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent encouraged Congress to pass the aforementioned H.R. 40 bill to study reparations proposals, but the working group did not directly endorse any specific reparation proposal. The report noted that there exists a legacy of racial inequality in the United States, explaining that despite substantial changes since the end of the enforcement of Jim Crow and the fight for civil rights, ideology ensuring the domination of one group over another continues to negatively impact the civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights of African Americans today. The report notes that a dangerous ideology of white supremacy inhibits social cohesion among the U.S. population. In 1999, African-American lawyer and activist Randall Robinson, founder of the Trans-African advocacy organization, wrote that America's history of race riots, lynching, and institutional discrimination has resulted in 1.4 trillion in losses for African Americans. Give me a second. I lost my place, guys. Give me 1 second. In 1999, I will repeat it again. In 1999, the African American lawyer and activist Randall Robinson, for the founder of the Trans African Advocacy Organization, wrote that America's history of race riots, lynching, and institutional discriminating have resulted in 1.4 trillion in losses for African Americans. Economist Robert Brown stated the ultimate goal of reparations should be to restore the black community to the economic position it would have if it had not been subjected to slavery and discrimination. He estimates a fair reparation value anywhere between 1.4 to 4.7 trillion, or roughly 142,000 for every black American living today. Other estimates range from 5.7 to 4.2 to 17.1 trillion. In January 2019, Maureen Williamson detailed the plans for reparations in an interview with Ebony magazine. Senator Elizabeth Warren and Cory Booker have both indicated some level of support for reparations, according to NPR. That's bullshit. Tulsi Gabbard is a co-conspirator of H.R. 40, the only piece of legislation in Congress to study and develop reparation proposals. And Bernie Sanders is a co-sponsor for the Senate version of the bill. This is such bullshit. Kamala Harris declared in April 2019 she supports reparations. Beto O'Rourke is open to considering some form of reparations, according to U.S. News and World Report. Opposition to slavery reparations is reflected in the general population. In a study conducted by YouGov in 2014, only 37% of the Americans believe that slaves should have been provided compensation in the form of cash after being freed. Furthermore, only 15% believe that descendants of slaves should receive cash payments. The findings indicate a clear divide between black and white Americans on the issue. The study summarized their findings, noting only 6% of the white Americans support cash reparations to the descendants of black slaves, compared to 99% of black Americans. Similarly, only 19% of whites and 63% of blacks support special education and job training programs for the descendants of slaves. 2014, in response to Tuashing Coates' article, The Case for Reparations, conservative journalist Kevin D. Williamson published an article titled The Case Against Reparations. Williams explains the people to whom reparations are owed to are long dead. Another article imposing reparations to slavery, also published in 2014 by Canadian-American neoconservative political commentator David Fromm. Okay, we're basically going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about how UK feels about reparations. Welcome back. This is Jeffrey Frazier of Black Wall Street Chronicles, and I was reading over this case for reparations in the UK, and seems that the UK reparations debate is actually maybe a little bit even more interesting than it is in the States. So, in 2004, descendants of African slaves in America enlisted Ed Fager in a class action lawsuit against insurance market Lloyd's of London, among other British and American corporations, stating that by insuring and financing the slave ships, they were complicit in genocide. The case was not successful. In Jamaica in 2004, a coalition of the Rastafari movement and the Berber Moors, who built the infrastructure of nations but never fully got paid for their building knowledge, and other groups argued that European countries formerly involved in the slave trade, especially Britain, should pay £72.5 billion to resettle 500,000 Jamaican Rastafarians in Africa. The claim was rejected by the British government, which said it could not be held accountable for wrongs in past centuries. On the 27th of November 2006, British Prime Minister Tony Blair made a partial apology for Britain's role in the African slavery trade. However, the African rights activists denounced it as empty rhetoric that failed to address the issue properly. They feel his apology stopped shy to prevent any legal retort. Blair again apologized on March 14, 2007. On August 24, 2007, Ken Livingstone, then mayor of London, apologized publicly for London's role in the slave trade. You can look across to see the institutions that still have the benefit of wealth they created from slavery, he said, pointing towards the financial district before breaking down in tears. He claimed that London was still tainted by the horrors of slavery. Jesse Jackson praised Mayor Livingstone and added that reparations should be made. Interesting. I'm going to talk about how Africa, the continent of Africa, feels about reparations. In 1999, the African World Reparations and Reparation Truth Commission called for the West to pay $777 trillion to Africa within 5 years. In September 2001, the United Nations sponsored the World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance held in Durban, South Africa. The Durban Review Conference sponsored a resolution stating that the West owed reparations to Africa due to this racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance that the Atlantic slave trade caused. Leaders of several African nations supported this resolution. Former Minister of Justice of Sudan, Ali Mohammed Osam Yassan, said that the slave trade is responsible for the current problems plaguing Africa. Let's talk about the Caribbean. In 2007, Ghana President Barrat Jado formally called on European nations to pay reparations for the slave trade. President Jago stated, although some members of the international community have recognized their active role in this despicable system, they need to go a step further and support reparations. In 2014, the Parliament of Ghana established a Reparations Committee of Ghana to further investigate the impact of slavery and create formal demands for reparations. In 2011, Antigua and Barbuda called for reparations at the United Nations, saying that the segregation and violence against the people of African descent had impaired the capacity for advancement as nations, communities, and individuals. More recently, in 2016, the ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda to the United States, Sir Roland Sanders, called on Harvard University to demonstrate its remorse and debt to unnamed slaves for Antigua and Barbuda. According to Sanders, Isaac Royal Jr. was the first endowed professor at law at Harvard, relied on the slaves on his plantation in Antigua when establishing Harvard Law School. Sanders recommended these reparations come in the form of annual scholarships for Antiguans and Barbadians. That's interesting. We'll go back to that again. Let me read on. In 2012, Jamaica received its reparations for commission to consider the question of whether the country should seek an apology of reparations from Britain for its role in the slave trade. The opposition cited Britain's role to end of the slave trade as a reason that Britain should issue no reparations. Also in 2012, the Barbados government established a 12-member reparations task force to be responsible for sustaining the local, regional, and international momentum for reparations. Barbados is reportedly currently leading the way in calling for reparations from former colonial powers for the injustice suffered by slaves and their families. In 2013, in the first a series of lectures in Georgetown, Ghana, to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the 1763 Berbice slave revolt. Principal of the Cave Hill campus of the University of the West Indies, Sir Hilary Beckles urged Caribbean community countries to emulate the position adopted by the Jews who were persecuted during the Second World War and have since organized a Jewish Reparations Fund. CARICOM Reparations Commission. Following Sir Hilary Beckles' advice, the CARICOM Reparations Commission was created in September 2013, 2014, and 15 Caribbean nations unveiled the CARICOM 10-point plan for reparatory justice, which spelled out the demands for reparations from Europe for the enduring suffering inflicted by the Atlantic slave trade. Among these demands were formal apologies from all nations, as opposed to statements of regret, reparation of displaced Africans to their homeland, programs to help Africans learn and share their histories, and institutions to import slavery descendants, literacy, physical help, and psychological help. Representatives of Caribbean states have repeatedly announced their intention to bring the issue to the International Court of Justice. However, as of 2019, no action has been taken. Moreover, from the perspective of international law, it is disputed whether slavery, genocide, and other crimes against humanity have been outlawed at the time they were committed in the Caribbean. As international law knows the principle of intertemporal law, in principle today's prohibitants cannot be applied retroactively. Still, some lawyers have argued that expectations to the principle of intemporal law has applicable in cases of crimes against humanity, as European states and their representatives could not expect slavery to be legal in the future, referred to as technological reduction of the principle. This is interesting. What we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and I'm going to talk about some talking points that I read from the Caribbean, because what they're asking the reparations is very interesting. Take a quick break. Yes, this is Jeffrey Frazier from Black Wall Street Chronicles, and we back at it again. Um, we need to have a let's recap what I was just talking about. The Caribbean reparations was interesting to me because they talked about Harvard, how the first professor of Harvard University, Isaac Royal Jr., first professor of law at Harvard, relied on the slaves on his plantation in Antigua when established Harvard Law School. So that means that what Antigua and Barbuda are basically asking for in the form of reparations is college and Harvard lawsuit. That's interesting. Harvard Law School should give scholarships. Matter of fact, being that the slaves from Antigua and Barbuda are basically responsible for building Harvard Law School, anybody who is a descendant of Antigua and Barbuda should be able to go to Harvard for free. That's in my opinion. You know, recently DJ Vlad was talking about college should be in the form of college. Reparations should be in form of free college. And I was looking on an episode of the podcast, Neil Brennan's new podcast, and he said the same thing. I find it very interesting that white liberals think that college is a great form of reparations. When in actuality, college actually, and universities and college shows the disparities between white and black people. If you don't believe me, we can talk about the lady that played Aunt Becky in Full House. She currently in court for scamming her kids into get into USC, to scam her kids into get into USC. It's very interesting. My thing is like that college admission scam pisses me off because back in high school, um, I said this little white lie. I said I got a 1400 on my SAT just to get some clout, and it actually wasn't true. It was a lie. And I was scolded for it. It's funny how I'm scolded for telling a white lie about my SAT scores, and these these rich white people is actually paying proctors and coaches thousands and thousands of dollars basically to set up their kids and to get into university. And it's interesting, you know, you have members of my community says, "Oh, don't go to university. Don't go to university. Go to trade school." Really? We should go to trade schools. Universities is bad. All right. If university is bad, why is it that these rich white people are doing everything in their power to make sure their kids get into a best college? You see, good college and university education in the United States of America is becoming very rare and a rare commodity. I'm just find it very interesting that Barbuda and Antigua is specifically asking for that, and they should ask for that. I mean, people build Harvard Law School. If it wasn't for the Antiguans and the Barbudans, there wouldn't be no President Barack Obama, because President Barack Obama comes to Harvard Law School. That's actually very interesting. Yeah, maybe Antigua and Barbuda needs to get into college, into Harvard for free. Mm. So, what we're going to do right now is want to talk about what reparations for the African American should be. I was looking at this documentary that's called Two Park Avenues. Is on the Y on YouTube, and it basically showed the financial disparity of New York City. You see, and I live in New York City, and I'm from the Bronx. So according to this documentary, The Y on YouTube, it basically said that you know the fiscally richest people in New York City live in 740 Park Avenue, and the fiscally poorest people in New York City lives in the South Bronx on 100 East 158th Street and Park Avenue. And that is the disparity. And, and of course, the people who live in the 740 Park Avenue are white. And the people who live on 158th Street and Park Avenue in the South Bronx are black. So if you're a black single mother who lives in the projects in the South Bronx, you are the fiscally most poorest person in the country. You have less money than those white, poor white people who live in the Appalachian Mountains. So I propose that any American who net worth is $100 million and up should pay a form of a reparations tax. You should put the reparations tax, and all of the money that has been accumulated for that reparations tax should be helped to stimulate the economy of foundational African Americans. And we need to talk about these banks. You see, the United States of America handed out a $700 billion stimulus package to basically save the banking industry and the vehicle industry. If you give $700 billion a stimulus package to the housing industry and the vehicle industry, why don't you give $700 billion of money for reparations? A $700 billion reparations grant for African Americans to start their own business, because this is Black Wall Street Chronicles, and I am a descendant of Black Wall Street. And the reason why our community, we don't own our own businesses, because back in the days of Reconstruction, when we tried to build our own businesses and we tried to build our own communities, you had these white Americans come into our towns and set our towns on fire for no reason at all. I recently talked about Williamton, North Carolina. I was reading about that. And in Williamton, North Carolina, you actually had black congressmen and black politicians running the Williamton, North Carolina, just like white politicians. And it was a system. It was a very diverse system right after the Civil War. But what the white supremacists did is they didn't like that, so they basically falsely accused black men in that town for harassing the white woman, and it caused so much outrage that they said, "Listen, we don't care if you're a congressman or if you don't get out of the town right now, we're gonna kill you." And they ran all of the black politicians out of town. So, being that you have attacked black politicians, being that you attacked independent business owners, black men and black women with impunity, you should hand a $700 billion reparations grant for young black men and young black women to start their own business. And that's just the start. I believe the H.R. 40 bill is actually a waste of time. As I was reading, you heard my disgust when they said that Kamala Harris and Senator Sanders and Senator Warren said that they support reparations, which is a lie. Because every time they ask Senator Sanders for reparations, they try to deflect. And the H.R. 40 bill is fraudulent. Like, you're talking around the situation. He's like, "Oh, you need to do this H.R. 40 bill just to do research." No, you don't need no research. You guys know what happened. You're handing out a $700 billion stimulus package to bankers and vehicle companies that are screwing over the United States of America, screwing over poor Americans and middle class Americans. And then you don't have the audacity to give a $700 billion stimulus package for African Americans, young black men and young black women who want to start their own business. The hypocrisy is ridiculous to me. It's not fair. It's not fair. Like, I'm a smart guy, and the only thing that seems to be in my way for entrepreneurship and receive wealth is poverty and it's money. And, I feel that certain white Americans have a better advantage than me. It's not cool. So, this is what we're going to do. This was my opinion on reparations. I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about next week, but here's what we're going to do. You are going to follow me on my Instagram, BlackKage840. Again, my Instagram is BlackKage840. On my Instagram, you'll have my Facebook page. You'll have my podcast page. You'll have my Twitch account. And you'll have my Twitter account. And I hope that you guys have a pleasant night. Enjoy. I'm in New York City. Signing off. Take care.